They searched for her for months, but what the water finally revealed would change everything. In April 2003, along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay, a discovery was made that turned heartbreak into horror. The remains of an unborn child surfaced first. Days later, the body of his mother, 8 months pregnant, missing since Christmas Eve. And suddenly, the question was no longer where is Laci Peterson, it was who put her there. Evidence began to surface, lies began to unravel, and the man who had once stood beside grieving families would soon stand alone, facing the full weight of justice. This is the story of betrayal, of a marriage built on secrets, and of a trial that divided America. This is the murder of Laci Peterson. The courtroom opens. The trial began in June 2004 inside a San Mateo County courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled, every camera was pointed forward, and every juror sat knowing they were about to weigh the fate of a man the nation had already judged. Scott walked in wearing a suit, his expression composed, his demeanor eerily calm. It was the same unsettling calmness investigators noted months earlier, a calm that felt less like peace and more like vacancy. Across the room, the Rocha family sat together, bracing themselves for the storm. This was no ordinary trial. This was a test of truth versus performance, emotion versus evidence, heart versus calculation. And the prosecution was ready. The prosecution strikes first. Prosecutors painted a chilling image of a man living 2 lives. One as the husband of a beautiful, expectant mother. The other as a lover who wanted freedom without the cost of honesty. Their opening statements were sharp. Scott didn't just betray Laci. He erased her. He silenced her, and then pretended to mourn her. To prove it, they presented a timeline so precise it felt like a trap snapping shut. The secret boat purchase, the numerous bay trips before she disappeared, the lies to Amber Fry, the sudden decision to go fishing, the cell phone pings, the cement anchors he made, one found missing, the matching location where the body surfaced. Piece by piece, the narrative darkened, and as the jury listened, the weight of each detail seemed to settle onto their shoulders like cold, heavy sand. Amber Fry takes the stand. The courtroom fell silent when Amber Fry entered. There was no anger in her face, no theatrics, just truth, stark, steady, and devastating. She described meeting Scott, falling for him, believing he was widowed, hearing him say this before Laci even disappeared. He told me he had already lost his wife, she said. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom, a sound of collective disbelief. Amber's recorded calls were played next. The jurors listened to Scott lie softly, sweetly, effortlessly, his voice filled with affection while outside, the world desperately searched for his pregnant wife. Amber didn't just testify, she exposed him, and in doing so, she shattered the final image Scott had tried to preserve, the image of a grieving husband. The science and the sea. Next came the forensic experts, voices steady with fact. They explained the currents of the bay, the drift patterns, the exact locations where Laci and baby Connor were found. The science suggested their bodies had entered the water near one location, where Scott claimed he went fishing. Then came the autopsy findings. Even seasoned investigators struggled to listen. The injuries, the condition of the remains, the horrifying detail that baby Connor may have been expelled from Laci's body due to decomposition in water, a natural but gut-wrenching process. The courtroom felt colder, the atmosphere darker. This wasn't simply murder. It was erasure, a mother and child swallowed by water, their identities stolen, their lives reduced to evidence. The defense fights back. Scott's defense team tried to redirect suspicion. They suggested strangers might have abducted Laci. They blamed burglars. They blamed the media. They even blamed the currents of the bay, arguing the locations where the bodies washed ashore didn't perfectly match predictions. But the jury didn't see doubt. They saw desperation. The defense had theories. The prosecution had evidence. And evidence speaks louder than speculation. The jury decides. After months of testimony, thousands of pages of evidence, and endless public debate, The jury withdrew to deliberate. The span of hours felt like days. The tension outside the courthouse thickened. Cameras waited. Families prayed. America held its breath. Then, the announcement. A verdict had been reached. Scott Peterson was brought into the courtroom. He sat, back straight, jaw tight. The jury foreman stood. The world leaned forward. The verdict. Guilty. First-degree murder of Laci Denise Peterson. Second-degree murder of unborn baby Connor. There was a gasp, a fracture of emotion echoing through the room. The Rocha family wept softly. Reporters scribbled in frantic strokes. Scott stared ahead, his face frozen. There was no moment of realization. No crack in a mask, just stillness, as if he had already rehearsed this moment in his mind, or detached from it completely. Later, during the sentencing phase, the jury recommended the death penalty. And with that, the long, agonizing path to justice for Laci and Connor found its final chapter. Or so the world thought, because the darkness in this case would continue to stretch for years. The aftermath. Scott Peterson was sent to death row at San Quentin, where he became one of the most polarizing inmates in California's history. Supporters claimed he'd been convicted by emotion. Opponents argued justice had been served. Documentaries, books, and debates kept the case alive long after the verdict. But behind all the noise, one truth remained unshakable. Laci Peterson, a vibrant 27-year-old woman excited to become a mother, had been taken from the world in an act of chilling cruelty. And the little boy she planned to name Connor, a child who never saw the light of day, became the silent symbol of a tragedy that shook the nation. The search for truth. The courtroom felt nothing like a battlefield. Yet that is exactly what it became. On one side stood the prosecution, determined, unrelenting, certain that Scott Peterson was a man who had murdered his wife and unborn child in a moment of cold calculation. On the other side sat Scott, expression fixed, jaw tight, insisting he was innocent, insisting that Laci had vanished to the hands of someone else. But truth, in this room, had a way of bending under the weight of perception. And perception had already declared him guilty. The trial of California versus Scott Peterson was more than a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle. Television vans lined the street. Commentators dissected each detail. Photographers snapped pictures as if capturing the slow downfall of a villain. And in the middle of it all, the memory of Laci, soft, kind, full of life, was pulled like fabric between two sides determined to reshape her story. Inside the courthouse, the lights were harsh. The air was cold. Every seat was filled. Every breath felt watched. Witnesses stepped forward, one after another. Neighbors, detectives, phone technicians, scientists, each trying to piece together the puzzle. But the puzzle had missing edges, pieces that didn't fit cleanly no matter how hard each side pushed. The prosecution's case rested heavily on circumstance. There was no eyewitness, no confession, no physical evidence tying Scott to a violent act. No scene of struggle, no blood, no weapon, no trace of Laci in the truck, the house, or the boat. Yet, there was something else, something far more powerful than evidence. There was absence. The absence of truth, the absence of clarity, the absence of a perfect alibi, and the absence of emotion. The jury watched Scott carefully. Some saw a man holding himself together. Others saw a man who didn't care enough to fall apart. Two interpretations, one expression. Even before the verdict, the trial felt like a slow tide rising around him. The science takes the stand. Experts took their places, unfolding charts and models. The prosecution's main scientific anchor came from a theory, a reconstruction of tides, currents, drift patterns. A marine biologist presented a demonstration that aimed to show how Laci's remains could have surfaced near the same location where Scott went fishing. But under cross-examination, the certainty thinned. Tidal science is unpredictable. Currents shift. Wind changes paths. Bodies drift differently depending on countless small variables. Temperature, salt levels, storms, decay. The defense pushed each crack wider. But the jury had heard something earlier that stuck deeper than any scientific explanation. Scott had lied, and the lies were sharp, visible, undeniable. He lied about Amber Fry. He lied about where he was sometimes. He lied about small things, details that didn't matter. Yet they mattered because they were lies nonetheless. One juror later said, "If he lied about that, what else would he lie about?" Another said, "I couldn't get past the affair. It changed everything." The courtroom had turned into a place where science tried to speak, but emotion spoke louder. The defense struggles. When it was finally the defense's turn, their uphill climb felt more like scaling a cliff. They showed pictures of the house, neat, quiet, undisturbed. They showed the dog leash still hanging. They presented reports of burglaries in the same neighborhood during the same time. They suggested the possibility of an intruder. They questioned the reliability of eyewitnesses who claimed to see Laci walking after Scott had left. But every rising point was met with a counter-argument. No signs of forced entry, no confirmed kidnapping, no ransom, no trace of another suspect. And although the defense cross-examined diligently, the momentum never shifted. The tide of public opinion had already gathered strength, pushing through the courthouse doors and into the jury box. Each day, Scott appeared smaller. Each day, Laci's presence grew larger, filling the room with a quiet ache. The families wait. Outside the courtroom, two families lived through a nightmare neither asked for. The Rocha family, Laci's side, sat together, holding hands, weeping quietly. To them, the sight of Scott was a wound reopening each morning. They listened because they had to. They endured because they had no choice. On the other side were Scott's parents, silent, steadfast, hearts breaking for a son they still believed in. His mother often kept her gaze fixed on the floor. His father sat stiff, as if holding invisible weight across his shoulders. Two families, one tragedy. No version of justice could ever bring Laci home. And in the middle, an unborn child who never had the chance to open his eyes. The final days of testimony. As the trial approached its final days, the atmosphere shifted. The courtroom grew quieter, almost reverent, as if everyone could feel an ending drawing near. The judge's voice echoed against the walls. Papers shuffled with a kind of finality. Closing arguments loomed ahead. But before they began, the prosecutor delivered something unexpected. A recording. Amber Frey's phone call with Scott, played again for the courtroom. His calm voice contrasted painfully with the timeline. The jury listened, some with eyebrows furrowed, some with lips pressed tightly. When the tape ended, silence swept through the room. Not a legal point, not a scientific breakthrough, just emotion, raw and undeniable. The prosecution had known exactly what they were doing. Closing arguments. When the time came, the prosecutor stood tall, voice unwavering. They painted a picture of motive, freedom from responsibility, a new relationship, a life without obligations. They argued opportunity, the time alone, the fishing trip, the lies. They framed the timeline so tightly that it left almost no breathing room. Then they rested. The defense rose, appealing to logic over emotion. No body until months later. No physical evidence. No eyewitness. No weapon. No proof. They reminded the jury of reasonable doubt, the cornerstone of the justice system. But logic often loses to the weight of a story, and the prosecution had told a powerful one. The waiting. The jury left to deliberate. Hours passed, then days. Outside, reporters lined the steps. Inside, family members clung to each other, suspended between hope and dread. And Scott, he sat motionless. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He didn't break. He simply waited, as if the verdict had already entered the room and was merely taking its time to walk toward him. The verdict, the aftermath, the shadows that remain. The jury room door opened, and the sound cut through the courtroom like a cold wind. Everyone stood. The jurors walked in a line, slow, somber, eyes fixed downward. There was something final in their expressions, something grave. Not one of them looked toward Scott. He sat still, hands folded, jaw locked. Across the room, Laci's family held one another tightly, as if bracing for impact. The judge asked the foreperson to rise. In a voice barely above a whisper, the foreperson read the words that would echo across America. We, the jury, find the defendant, Scott Lee Peterson, guilty of the murder of Laci Peterson in the first degree. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, sharp, immediate. Then the second line followed. And guilty of the murder of the unborn child in the second degree. The room shattered. Laci's mother fell against a loved one, sobbing. Her father closed his eyes, trembling, shoulders collapsing under the weight of grief made new again. Scott's family looked stunned, frozen in disbelief, pain printed across their faces. His mother covered her mouth. His father's face drained of color. Scott himself blinked slowly. No outburst, no pleading, just a long exhale, as if surrendering to a moment he had sensed was coming. The jury was dismissed. Reporters rushed out the doors, and the case, once a missing persons investigation, had now become one of the most infamous convictions in California history. The sentencing. When the sentencing phase arrived, the room had changed. The shock had settled. The grief remained, and the process resumed, cold and methodical. The prosecution requested the harshest punishment allowed by law. They played home videos of Laci, laughing, smiling, rubbing her belly, glowing with anticipation. Each clip tore deeper into the hearts of those watching. The courtroom felt heavy with the memory of a life that should have continued. When it was the defense's turn, they portrayed Scott as a son, a sibling, a man capable of compassion. They begged the jury to spare his life. But emotion had chosen its side. When the decision came, the foreperson spoke clearly. Death. A sentence reserved for the most unforgivable acts. Scott lowered his head. In the audience, Laci's family cried again. Not with joy, but with exhaustion. Justice, they knew, could comfort, but it could not restore. And as Scott Peterson was led away in shackles, the world outside split into two camps. Those who believed justice had been done, and those who believed the wrong man had been condemned. The world after. Time passed, but the case refused to fade. Documentaries were filmed. Books were written. Debates raged across television screens and internet forums. Some pointed to the lack of physical evidence. Others pointed to Scott's lies, his behavior, the eerie calmness he carried like a second skin. For every expert who believed in his guilt, another raised doubts. Title inconsistencies, untested leads, the strange burglary on the same block, the eyewitnesses who swore they saw Laci walking after Scott had left. But none of it mattered. The verdict stood. Scott Peterson was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, placed on death row, a place of concrete, razor wire, and muted echoes. His cell overlooked the cold waters of the bay, the same waters prosecutors claimed held Laci on that winter day. He lived in a world reduced to metal and silence. 23 hours a day alone. 1 hour in a barren exercise yard, outside the prison walls. The conversation continued without him. The appeals, the questions, the uncertainty. Years later, the California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence. Not his conviction, but the penalty. The process had flaws. Jury selection had been contaminated. Bias had seeped in. His life was spared, but his freedom was not. He remained behind bars. In legal filings, investigative reports, and podcasts, questions kept resurfacing. Were the sightings of Laci walking that morning accurate or mistaken? Were the burglary suspects fully cleared? Did the title models truly align with the discovery of the remains? Was the media bias so overwhelming that guilt became a foregone conclusion? Even among experts, the case never settled into certainty. The only thing certain was this. 2 lives, Laci and Connor, were lost. A family's world had been torn apart, and the truth, whatever it was, remained clouded in silence. The legacy of a missing woman. Every year on December 24th, the Rocha family gathers quietly. The candles flicker, the air grows still, and Laci's name is spoken with the same tenderness it always carried. They remember her smile, her warmth, her joy, her dreams of raising her son, her plans for Christmas morning that never came. To them, she is not a case, not a headline, not a courtroom story. She is their daughter, their sister, their heart. The world may debate what really happened, but their grief has only one shape, one truth, one pain that never leaves. In the quiet moments, when the cameras are gone and the world stops watching, the loss returns with the same sharpness it carried in 2002. The final moments of the documentary. There are cases that fade quietly in archives, and there are cases that live forever in the cracks of collective memory. Laci Peterson's story is the latter. A story of a woman who should have grown old. A story of a child who should have taken his first breath. A story of a family who should never have known this kind of sorrow. And perhaps most haunting of all, a story of truth forever divided. Was justice served? Or was justice shaped by fear, by grief, by perception? In the cold silence of unresolved questions, one fact remains unshakable. A woman is gone. A child is gone. A family is broken. And answers, full, complete, absolute, may never come. This is the weight the world carries. This is the shadow the case leaves behind. This is the story of Laci Peterson. If you're still with me, you're one of the few who can't look away. Subscribe, because what comes next is even darker.
Don't let the trail go cold. Subscribe to Cold Case Secrets.